Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of this podcast, this design session, live session. And in this live session, we're going to continue with our design for the St. Mary's Hospital. So first thing first, this is a series, right? So if you want to, you can go and check out some of the older series to just see how we're doing and where we're getting to, because we're basically going to continue with where we left off last time. So we'll continue with our design basically, right? So yeah, let's check it out. Please let me know if the connection is okay as well. Sundays I think can be a little bit tough in the area, so we want to make sure that you guys are hearing me okay and everything. Cool. So this is where we're gonna get to today. Well, actually, probably even a little bit more. But let's see where we started from. So I'm gonna open the file that we finished with in the last session, this design session here. And let's see what we have here now. So we did a pretty good massing. But I did do a little bit of work offline, right? So the first thing I want to do is tell you like exactly the kind of work that I started doing online, or rather offline, not online, after we finished our last session and we left the model at this state over here. Actually, this is already a little bit more advanced, isn't it? So let's go back to the way it was, and we just have to turn off a couple of things here. And you see that actually the model is not that different than what we had initially. And again, if you're new, then maybe I can do a quick summary for you. So this model here is basically done with a lot of booleans. Right? So we've got all these booleans here that are set up, and they basically start with a massing, and that massing is decreased based on all these different kinds of booleans that they do all the different kinds of setbacks, right? So we have one that's in the middle. So these ones here move in the middle, and then we have a couple more that are just all the other setbacks. So between the previous session and this session, I did go and clean up the file a little bit. So let's see how it looks now. Right, so it's just basically the same, but a little bit more organized. You have to do that once you get a bit more complicated, because you see, if you don't know what's going on in here, if you're brand new, right, it can look really confusing. But get this, it's actually not, right? So if I turn off a couple of things here, and we see what we have. So we have all of our booleans are basically here, right? And they interact with our massing over here. So our massing is this. And if we turn off the booleans onto the massing, you see we have all this. So it's very nice because it's just one kind of massing. And then we have all the different kinds of booleans that go on top of there. Now within booleans, I've also created a couple of collections that make it also easier to understand. So we have the setbacks, which when I turn off, you see now it's a little bit cleaner, right? So we have the corridors in the ground. So we have one corridor here, and then we have the second corridor that's happening over here. And then we have this kind of setback that's happening in the middle of our building there. So three booleans, three boxes basically. These boxes are a little bit more complicated, right? We have a couple of setbacks, some on top and some on the back. And then there's another element in here which you can see helps us fix our bridge. So we have these bridges that span between the different buildings, which is very important to this. If you want to know a little bit more about that, then check out the previous session. But let's go and continue with how this file is now organized and cleaned up a little bit. All right, so then we have setbacks. So then all the setbacks or all these elements that we have in here, they're very simple boxes once again, aren't they? And I went, and some of those I did go and edit a bit more since the last session as well, to get a much better idea of what the setbacks can look like. And so that's the booleans layer, and we can hide those because most of the time we just want these to move the bridges around. The next interesting thing is the bridges, right? So the bridges is basically these boxes. Very straightforward. I mean, everything is just boxes. It's amazing to be able to be doing this with a bunch of boxes, isn't it? Because it's very procedural all at the same time. But this specific box is removing itself from the corridor, which is making our bridges. And then we use it again, because check it out. Do you see how the material is a little different? And we can highlight the difference of the material a bit more by changing the material color. So let's do something crazy like green, right? So that's a little trick that I'm going to show you now of how we do with geometry nodes. So if I turn off geometry nodes, you see everything gets this kind of color. But if we turn geometry nodes back on, it basically interacts with this extra box that we have in here. And whatever geometry is close to that, whichever faces are close to that, those get that special material, that special model. So it's really useful to keep everything pretty procedural. And what else do we have in here? So we got the floors. And the floors, really straightforward. So it's an array, let's turn them off, of really large boxes, right? It's just a plain array, then intersected, Boolean intersected with our massing. And then we add a layer of solidification, and then another one, which is just an extra thickness, which helps us visualize exactly where the floors are while we're continuing with this kind of massing. So that's basically where we are at the moment. At this stage, we have a pretty good massing. So before I talk a little bit more about the geometry, I want to talk about a few other things over here. So there I am. So it's essentially what we want to do now is spend a little bit of time creating some views. And those views are going to be really important for us because we're going to be setting them up once and then we won't need to really worry about them again. So in here, I did start to set them all up already, but we're going to go and set them up from scratch. And that's the kind of view that I'm talking about, right? So we have some kind of isometric view that becomes very useful for understanding our object from all the different kinds of angles that we've got. So we've got the 4 isometric views over here. And then we have the camera views. That's not a camera view. That's a camera view that we had set up before. And remember, the whole intent of this massing is creating this waterfall, right? And by the way, you can notice also that we do have a waterfall picture in there. That's just something that I found on the internet, an image that I isolated and brought into here. But it's important because it starts to give us a better understanding and representation of what's going on in there. And then we've got our bridge. Right, so we have the bridge here, which is going to also be the structure for our waterfall. Cool. Right, so I'm going to save this file as save as St. Mary's O3B. And let's redo these cameras now. So in top view, shift right click somewhere. Let's enable screencast keys. Then shift A, camera. And in the camera options, we want to make it orthographic and change the scale to something like 300 as a start. So that's going to make the camera quite large. And let's bring it quite a bit up. And now we're just setting the location. So not quite the camera yet. But I think I want the camera to be somewhere over here, and then it's looking at our object in that direction. Okay, so once we have the camera more or less in the correct location, let's now set the rotation. So with a typical camera, isometric camera, the X rotation is 54.7. And then the Z is multiples of 45. So let's see what this camera starts to look like now. We'll use one of these views over here that we have. So this is the bottom view, that's okay. And let's set this view up by making this active. And in here, I'm going to press 0 on my number pad to go into that camera view. So that's what this camera looks like. So the problem is though, that isometric view doesn't quite work because our whole site is slightly rotated. So we need to rotate our camera with that angle. And that angle is 15.5 degrees. So all we need to do in here is change the Z of 45 plus 15.5 degrees. So now it's a perfect isometric file, which, you know, in a program like Affinity Designer or Illustrator, you can go in there. We can go in there and continue to change this and have everything snap in the correct way for us. Okay, so now we've got this view that's basically set up, and it's an important view because we'll keep reusing this and recycling it. So then let's name it, and let's call it cam ISO 01. And I'll put it, so I've created a camera collection. Go to top view, Shift D, and then let's place it somewhere over here, and then R to rotate, and we want to rotate that 90 degrees. So that's our second camera, and that second camera can live somewhere over here. Let's click on it and adjust it now by looking at the view that we've got to make sure that we have it aligned more or less in the right way that we want. Okay. And now we do the same. So Shift D, R 90, Shift D, R 90. I'm going to start doing things a little bit faster, just so we demonstrate more of the typical speed that, you know, we can work with in Blender. Now, do you notice how we get some of those buildings that are starting to get cut? We basically need to send that camera a little bit further up and further away. So if I press G and then Z and then Z again, that goes along its local Z axis. So if we send it back, we still see everything except those buildings are not cut away the same way. So G, Z, Z. Very important. And if we move forward, we could even cut from our building. But that, you know, it's an interesting cut. It's a proper cut, but, you know, we never cut like that in architecture, do we? We always have some kind of section cut plane, which would be a useful thing to show you at some point while we're talking about this. Because we always need sections also, don't we? And then let's go to the last one. Look at it. We have to move along the Z axis as well. G, Z, Z. Okay. Cool, so those are the cameras. Now, I'm going to quickly undo all of those because I've already set the ones that I had before in the correct location. So I want to make sure that I keep them because that's important for the kinds of views that I started to set up. So there they are, but they should be exactly the same. There. Okay, so cameras are done. You understand the collections. So we're ready to move on. And what do we move on to now? So we've got a facade. Now this facade here, this is very illustrative, right? This is not going to be our actual facade. I certainly hope that we can move well away from what we've got here, but it's a good starting point, right? So it gives us an understanding of the scale that we're doing. Within this facade, you can also notice that our bridges are also slightly different, right? And, you know, there's some issues with the facade as well. Like here it ends in like a out place. Doesn't end at the right place. And I think we just need to refresh it. Let's see. There you go. Now that's fixed. Now, how does this work? So this is using the tissue add-on. And the tissue add-on has a function called contour curves. So if we look at contour curves. So we have a layer that's called, an object that's called contour curves. And I go in the modifier. So I've added geometry nodes on top of those curves, which is basically dividing all those curves by a set distance of 1 meter and then having booleans around. So if we turn them off and I isolate this, this is what it looks like. Okay, so very straightforward, very basic curves, but super useful to start to get an understanding of what the facade is starting to look like. So let's set these up now again. So I'm going to hide these. And then we click on our massing, and it's this massing over here, right? And then we say contour curves. And now it has a couple of settings. So offset should be 4.2, and that's the exact height that we are using for our floors. And then range value, offset range, and maximum curves. So all these we can set to default. So now if you look at our contour curves, sometimes it requires a little bit of, so we've got one. So we can go in the object data properties, and there's a subtab called tissue contour curves, and those we can start to modify them and make sure that they work. Okay, so what do we have here? So we have offset, then offset value, range of values. So this is how many times we're going to offset. So right now our maximum is 1 meter. We want our maximum to be quite a bit more than that. So let's try 70 meters. And you see, once we get up to 70 meters, then we get all of our contour curves. So it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty easy, and it works just like that. And it keeps everything nice and parametric for us. Meaning that if we go back and now we change our massing around a little. So let's go ahead and adjust our massing a little. I'm just setting up my windows here on the side view to make sure that I have a good understanding of the connection speed in case there might be some drops. There you go. So back in here. So if we adjust the massing, so if I turn on the Boolean corridors and I move that, and I just love moving these because it's amazing. It just makes it so fun and exciting to be able to play with that, doesn't it? It's like you get like this whole thing that's automatically being updated. So how do we want to do that? So we should probably go to top view and start to understand what the massing is doing. And I think that's pretty good. So we can move this object here a little bit as well. So if I go to local view and slightly push it out. So that's good. And now we've got this bridge that I know is a bridge on top that we want to match. In fact, we can probably parent that bridge to this curve, to this box over here. So it more or less always stays on the same place. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it just like what we've got here. Just the booleans though, there are quite a few and they can start to look a bit busy. So I try to turn them off whenever we're not using them. It makes the understanding of what we've got here a little bit easier. Cool. So now you see these curves. There they are, right? That's what they used to be. And all we need to click is within the tissue add-on is refresh. And now they go back to, no, they don't go back. They go to what they were. Cool. Okay. So next, our material changes on our bridges. So these bridges, remember, they didn't want to be really, really transparent because the intent of this project is that we have maximum views from this side to the other side because we've got this, first off, amazing canal and really beautiful context, and then we've got the waterfalls, right? So we want to give as many people the understanding that there's this amazing little plaza that we've got over here as possible. And we do that by making these bridges as transparent as possible. Now, why do we need the bridges in the first place? So we've got 3 buildings, but those 3 buildings should really function like one building, meaning that most of our circulation is here. The main vertical circulation, lift cores, they all happen in this central building. In these corner buildings over here, we're going to have just emergency circulation, secondary ones, and maybe some service lifts or emergency lifts and stairs, right? But everything has to happen through here. So we don't want to have too many circulation cores, right? So we don't want to have another lift core here and then another one here and another one there. But this way, even though it looks like 3 massings, it is functioning like one building with our bridges. That's why they're so important. And that's okay, right? Because on the ground floor, we don't have them. So they start a little bit higher. On the ground floor, we're saying that we have this nice podium, and whatever's happening in there, we have either some stairs, or it does get a little bit tricky with local lifts because we still need some kind of local lifts in there to get us to that mezzanine level. Or we say it's just retail, right? It's not connected to the top areas at all. It's doing its own completely different thing. So, how do we change that material and keep it all nice and parametric? We're going to start using geometry nodes. And the way that I work these days is that I'm doing little geometry node snippets for a lot of things. But geometry nodes doesn't need to be anything too difficult, because essentially it's just another modifier. And it can be as simple as we want. We can literally do something as simple as mirroring, or we can go to something quite heavy and involved where everything is completely parametric, and it's almost like something that you would do in Grasshopper, right? So you have everything. This case, this is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. So I have the massing selected at the moment, and then I'm going to click on the geometry nodes modifier that we've got here, and you see it says glass pots. So let's frame everything so we see what it is, and you see it's not terribly complex. In fact, we're going to rebuild it from scratch. I just want to show you exactly how it works for us, walk you through it, and then we'll build it from scratch together. So what do we have here? So we have the collection info. So this is the information that's coming in, and it's these Boolean bridges that we set up before. Remember what they were? They're basically these two boxes. So then we realize them as instances, we check the geometry proximity, and we separate our geometry. So that's the massing geometry that we've got going on. In fact, we can isolate this over here, and we can check. So if I press Control plus Shift on Windows on this, we get a really nice little viewer node. And I think I have to be in a non-rendered view. So, and you see, that's the kind of selection we do. So that's all it is checking the distance between each face that we have in our massing versus each face of these Boolean bridges. And within a certain distance, we isolate them. So the inverted is everything else that we've got going on in there, right? So what are we doing then? All we're doing is just, when we separate the geometry, we set a different material, setting material glass. Once we do that, we have to join the geometry, and we need to merge it again. Why do we need to merge it? Because if we don't, if I mute this, I can press M and mute it. You see how our floors, the Booleans, stop working because it's not a complete solid. So the Booleans don't have an idea of how they need to subtract themselves. Now if we enable that, the Booleans work again. The floors work again. Okay, let's build that now from scratch. I can do that a couple of ways. So what's this? This already has something. Let's get rid of it. Create a new one. And say glass bridges. So let's select everything. And then from here, we want to drag our Boolean bridges. So we can literally drag it. It makes it quite easy to work. We want to change this from original to relative. Then when we import the collection info in Grasshopper, in geometry nodes, it always comes in as instances. So we need to realize the instances. Next, geometry proximity. So this is our target, and we want to target faces. And now we get the distance. This doesn't know what it is yet because it needs to be connected with this, right? So once we connect it with something into there, then that becomes related to what we've got here. So how do we do that? We add a separate geometry. We plug it in here. And that distance, we want to use it to separate our geometry into 2. So let's isolate this. But if we only plug in that distance, that doesn't mean much, right? Because do you see those inputs are different? This is a Boolean input, basically zeros and ones, and this is a distance input. So we need to convert that distance to a Boolean input. And we do that with a compare node. So we plug in compare node in there, and then we say the distance is greater or less than a specific distance that we set up, and then that gives us a Boolean. So what do we want that distance to be? So remember, it's the distance between each face within our input geometry to the faces to our Boolean bridges. So let's try with something like 1, and right away we get this isolation. So everything that's greater than 1 is that selection, and then we have the opposite, which is just the bridges. Super straightforward, super simple. So now we want to set a new material just to this geometry here, and the material should be glass, and you see that it's already glass. By the way, why is everything glass in here? Let's turn this off for a second. Select everything. Okay, yeah, so because I made glass too, so that's the main glass, and this is the glass which is a little bit more transparent. In fact, let's make it a little bit clearer and say glass bridges. Glass bridges. And then this is just glass. There you go. Now that's a little bit easier. So glass bridges, so we know that's the same. Let's enable that modifier. And we have to exit. And now join geometry to join these two back together. What happened here? Why is this only a box? Oh, booleans are gone. There it is. And because whenever we have these two surfaces, so they're not completely connected, so we need to merge them, and there's a node for that. That's called merge by distance, and that's it. This is nice and done. So now if we go to preview mode, we see that this is a different one. If we disable geometry nodes, it's all the same kind of material. It's a little bit confused at the moment in terms of materials if we don't use it, but if we enable it, it works exactly like it should. And the wonderful thing is that everything is still quite parametric. Great. So now let's go on to the contour curves and see how we created that facade. So I have my contour curves here, and just for good practices, it's always useful to hit refresh. So we have a brand new refresh onto it, and then we create a new geometry nodes again. So as you can see, we're going to be working quite a bit with geometry nodes, and I think generally these days it's pretty inevitable that you would have to use a bit of geometry nodes. But the good thing is you don't have to do terribly complex thing or one massive geometry node script on one tiny object and be super parametric. I mean, there's definitely a time and place for that, I agree, but it doesn't need to be that way, right? It can be taken it with like small tiny bits of different specific objects, and that makes it so much easier to work with, and more importantly comprehend how to use them. Great. So we have our curves coming in here, and now we want to create so with those curves, the first thing we want to do is sample curve. So we want to resample the curves. And what does that do? So we have length, and we're saying that we're going to divide the curves by that length, which is, let's say, 1 meter. So now all the curves are divided in that 1 meter. And now those curves, they automatically also have points. So on those points, we can put whatever geometry we want. So we can create a very simple mullion, and we'll do that by creating a curve line. And that curved line is going to be 4.2 meters. Why 4.2 meters? Because that's the floor height to height that we're using everywhere. And next, we want to create a mesh from this. So curve to mesh. And we'll use another curve. So curve quadrilateral, curve quad. I think it's just quadrilateral. And that's going to be the profile curve. So we're making the single mullion now. So we're making the profile. This is the profile and this is the height of it. And this is quite large, so let's try with something like 0.1. We want to fill the caps and the next thing, so let's isolate this so we can see it. Now, we don't see this information because it's not going to the group output. So once I plug that into the group output, we should see our lonely little mullion over here, which is smooth. So curves are automatically rendered smooth, so we have to make them flat by adding a set shade smooth and uncheck shade smooth, and now that's nice and flat. So that's our individual mullion, which we're going to distribute to every single point along our curves with instance on points. So we add a instance on points node, and this is not points, this is going to be the instance, and these are going to be our points. And it's as simple as that. Now we've got all of our mullions everywhere. We can also give our mullion a material. So this is the mullion. So set material. Plug this into here. And we're going to put frame. I've made a dark frame material, so it's a little bit easier to see. Now we can go in there and we can change the width, and it all changes, or the height. Except there's one more thing that we need to do, which is to make sure that each of these mullions is rotated correctly along its curve. So right now, if we have something that's very thin, let's try 0.05, and the height is quite long, so something like that. Do you see how they're all staying in the exact same direction, the exact same way? So we don't want that. What we want is to rotate them. So we need to go here in instance on points and rotation. We drag this out and we look for something that's called align Euler to vector. And then the rotation comes from the curve tangent. So if we look for tangent, curve tangent, and that would give us what we want. Almost. So the pivot has to be along the z-axis. Oh, not rotation. This needs to go in vector. There you go. And now they should all go in the right direction. Great. And that's it. That's our facade setup now. So it's very straightforward, very simple. Of course, this is a first try, right? We're going to go to something that's hopefully much nicer and much more refined. We're going to have like loads of different sketches and ideas and concepts about what the facade is going to look like. But as a starting point, we do need something, and having something as straightforward as this, which gives us an idea of the scale a little bit more. You know, these are the kinds of panels that we're typically going to have, something about 1 meter. Probably it needs to be even broken up into 2, because 4 meters is quite tall for a window, right? Even though we're going to have like some other separation. But that gives us a good starting point of what we are going to expect. Now, we have to also break down our bridges, right? So those bridges, they're not going to be the same. We're going to have something that's less dense. We should have this as more transparent, because you see what's happening right now with these kinds of bridges that we have at the moment. All the transparency is completely gone. Granted, we're using something that's probably a little bit too wide at the moment, so 2 meters. So if we go to something a little bit more normal, like 0.5 meter, and these are halfways going out, so that's something that we need to adjust also as well. It's a little bit more tangible, right? So we do somehow see through, but if we want to, we can also make that the materiality a little bit different onto the contours. So it's always a good idea to organize these a little bit more so we understand exactly what goes where. And then, do you notice how every once in a while we have a couple of things that are not quite aligning? So that has to do with our contour geometry. So if we click on it's called contour curves, and we go to massing, and here we might want to change the offset value a little bit. In fact, on the ground floor, we might have a different kind of facade, right? So the mullions might be different. Something could be different on the ground. That's usually how we do it. So the ground always tends to look slightly different than what we have up on top. And the ground, so this setback starts at 8 meters. So this offset value, then we can make 8 meters. And once we do that, everything starts from above that point. Now I'm also noticing that I'm missing a floor plate over here. Let's see, where did that floor plate go? So now I've clicked on the floors. Let's look at their location to make sure that they're in the right place. So they're at 8 meters, indeed. Maybe we need to try something like 7.8 meters. Is that showing up? Not quite. Oh, it's coming through. Oh, okay. So it needs to go slightly higher. There you go. So that bridge, it was kind of, it didn't have a bottom. Now it has a bottom. So maybe we can go to something like 8.01. Yeah, so as long as it's a little bit higher than that top point, then we're good. And then it's the same thing that's happening in the levels. For example, like here, where we're having these slight intersections. So that curve is coming from the bottom and it's happening. Let's turn off, by the way, go to contour curves, turn off geometry nodes. Okay, we don't see it. So let's see how we're going to see it. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's the curve, right? There's that curve. And that curve needs to set itself back. But to do that, it also needs to be a little bit higher. So we need to change that offset value. And let's try 8.1. And let's keep trying a little bit higher, 8.15. Let's try 8.2. Come on. It's not quite setting itself back, so we need to keep pushing it just a little higher. 8.2. It might be better, now that I'm thinking of it, that we use the top curves instead of the bottom curves to be able to generate this kind of geometry. But now we've got it. So now it's in the right place, but it's in the right place here. Here it's still not in the right place, and that's a bit strange. So we can go to something like 8.32, 8.4, 8.5, or that might need to be slightly updated, it seems. 8.5. Okay, there you go. It's almost there. So yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, it would probably be better to start with the top curves and put our modians going down instead of from the bottom and going up, because if we think about it, that's what happens, right? So this slab, the slab of this floor plate actually extends all the way to where the previous item is. But if we look at the slab above it and the one that's going down, then the order is a little bit different. So that makes sense now that I'm thinking of it going that way, and that would probably alleviate some more of these slight errors that we see happening here. Although, to be fair, perfectly honest, at this stage they're okay, because we're not looking for perfection here. We're looking for a sense of what this massing is starting to look like and how we can work with it and what the scale is, because you guessed it, we're going to be sketching quite a few different sketches on here to get it to look right. Cool. So the other thing that, you know, we're not doing a complete architecture project in the sense that we are not figuring out the program so much because we don't know it, right? We're going to put a core in there, a few cores. We might put even some kind of stairs in there and some maybe like the corridor circulation throughout the building and the structural grid. But that's about it. Nevertheless, though, it's still quite important to have a good sense of the areas that we're proposing. So we can even do that with Blender. So we can put in the areas. We're going to do that with our floors over here. So right now we have these solidify modifiers. If we turn them off, we have these perfect plates in here. So if we isolate our floors, that's what we get. So that's all we need, and with this information we can already have quite a bit of analytical information. So within Blender there's a spreadsheet editor. So if I go to file type and go into the spreadsheet editor, and here with these objects clicked on faces, so you got 15, 14 floor, 15. Yeah, 15 because we started 0 floor plates. However, we don't have the areas just yet. So with geometry nodes, there's a really easy way to get the areas in there. So I'm going to create a new geometry nodes tree. Again, you can see it's just becoming so default. I mean, it's essentially another modifier. That's how I'm treating it, right? It's another modifier. And in here, It's very simple. So we get face area, and that face area can go into the group output, and now it's part of our output attributes. And we can make like a new, let's call it area. However, we don't really see it here. So to see it there, we have to do something else, which is called capture attribute. So if we put it in here, capture attribute, and we drag, actually not even capture, it's called store attribute. So store named attribute. So we can get rid of this one. So I'm gonna go in here and get rid of it, and then go put this area in this value and call it area, and make sure that it's aligned to face. So once it's aligned to face, boom, we have all the areas now for each one of our floor plates. We can round it as well. So if I add a math node, put it in here and change from add to round. And now we've got really nice floor areas that we can work with. So at each level, we know exactly how much area that we've got. Wait a minute. This is not quite making sense. So what is this 1734? I don't know the order. I think the order is not like we might think it is, because these might be the ones that are all the way up on top. We can check that as well. We can give them a random color so we understand which one is where. And also, we don't have 15 floors. How many floors do we have? Oh, we do have 15 floors. Okay, so this is indeed per floor. So these ones here, so 1734, 1734, they're definitely the top floors. And then the order is a bit, because that can't be the top one. So that one must be, yeah, so it might be a little bit different than what we've got here. But on top of that, we can do another thing. So we can display the total area. So it's typically called a gross floor area. So I can go in here, search for something, and what do we want to do? So there's a accumulate. By the way, I keep using search in nodes. You can go in there and search for it, but once you get to know the nodes, it's exactly like in Grasshopper, if any of you have experience with that, where it's much easier to work with the exact search that you're looking for. So I know what I'm looking for. It's called accumulate field. So we're getting these round numbers and we're accumulating them, and this is working along the face, and now that's going to give us our total area in there, and we can output that total area. So I can go first off and create a join geometry in here, and now we can create text. What is it called? I don't know the name of that one yet. I was just looking at it before this class to figure out exactly how to do it. So I know where it is though. So it's in utilities, text, and it's first off we need value to string, and then shift A and text. Utilities, text, string to curves. So that's what we need here. So this outputs text. It outputs really nice text. So we get our total area in here. We plug it into value to string. Value to string goes into here. It's not very happy with that value. Why not? We need to... That's right, we need to capture it. So this is the funny thing with geometry nodes. Sometimes, you know, the fields, they're called fields, and they have to be linked to something. Right now, that string is not linked to anything. And that's why we need to go to a capture attribute. And once we plug it in here, it's also not very happy. So we're gonna do it, because, is it face happy? Nope. So let's get rid of this. And what we want then is sample index. So that should do it. Yep, that works. And we just want the total in there. So now that should come true. Make sure this is on face. And now let's see that number. So first off, we can input that in there. And I know it's exactly the origin, so we need to move that origin point a little. And it's curves also, so we need to somehow show those curves. If we go to wire mode, that number is there. You see? If we make it bigger, it also comes true. So, but it's only a wire. So there's a way to make curves filled. So fill curve. If we put that in there, now that's a bit more solid. And that's what we want. And then we can modify that. So we can transform it. So we move it somewhere where we can see it. So transform geometry goes in there. And now we're going to try to move it. So move it in a place where we can see it. There it is. That's a big number. That's bigger than what I got last time. So let's make sure that this is right. So face area comes in here. Maybe that doesn't need to go in there. Makes no difference. And do we need to run? Ah, okay. This is on edge. That shouldn't be on edge. This needs to be on face. There you go. That's more like the number I got before. I got worried there for a second. I'm like, how do we have so much area if those are our numbers per floor plates? That's much better. So that's the area, which is adjustable. It's linked to those. It's linked to our floor plates. So we can move our floor plates and it's going to adjust itself. Just like I'm going to adjust my camera here so you see me a little bit better. Let's make the text a little bit larger. And just to demonstrate, I always like to demonstrate. If we go now in this view over here and move one of our main corridor elements here, move that around, you see that number is changing, right? Because our area of all the floor plates is changing. Super cool. Again, it's the kind of thing that you have in Grasshopper, and I think it's very useful for even for these early analytical conceptual phases, because yeah, we're not completely looking at how big our space is, and yeah, this is completely aspirational, fantastic, amazing, with a beautiful waterfall. But at the same time, we do want to be grounded in somewhat kind of reality and understand that how we're building, what we're showing in terms of geometry, what is the output that we're getting from that in terms of something as simple as areas. Cool. And now I like to kind of dress that number up a little bit, so we make it a little bit more understandable, right? So we need a comma in there. So these string values, by the way, I don't know why they're so kind of tucked in there. I really wish text was just like in the main menu, but who knows? Maybe once it gets a little bit more values in there. So in string, let's see where it is. Join strings. So we can join a couple of strings together into here. So first off, that goes in there, and now we can just have a simple string. Let's say m squared. So now we understand that that's meter squared. But I want to put a comma on that number and separate it. That one I found is a little bit tricky to do, but not terribly hard. So we first need to separate the string. Oh, I don't know if it's called slice string. That's the one that I'm looking for. Slice string. So first off, we want the first two numbers, right? Like that. And now I'm going to create another slice string. Let's move these over. Let's create another join string over here, just so we understand how these two come together. And that comes into here. And that's going to start at position 2. And go to, however many numbers it can go to. And now we need to put a comma. So these are two numbers now, and we just need one in the middle. So I'm going to duplicate this in there and drag it and connect it here and put a comma in there. So now we have something that looks a little bit more proper as a number. Let's put a space in there as well. So we read that. And then what would be even more useful is to duplicate this and say area or gross floor area, something like GFA. And then colon, and then space. So we drag that in there. So now we have something that we know that what that number is, and it looks more like a number and not some crazy long digit into it. Cool. So we've got that number, although when we turn on all the context, it's a bit hard to see, isn't it? So we already have a transform node in there. So if we just grab that Z and put it like way up there, where is it? It's hard to see. We need to give it a color as well. So let's add set material. Put that in here. And I usually make like a really dark color. If I don't have one, I'll make one. So create a new material here, call it dark, and change that from principled to just plain old diffuse. Viewport display is black, surface display is completely black, roughness is 100. And now that's what this material is going to get. So wherever we are, we're going to see it, right? So now we should see this over here. And we can drag that out even more along the y-axis. Cool. So now we've got this working. We got shadows in that, so you know that's probably not a good solution to use at all times. There are ways. Can we do it? How can we do it along? Yes, we can do that. So I like when problems come up because then I get to solve them on the spot. So let's see if we can get rid of that shadow. So we're now in the shader editor of this dark material, and we want to make that dark material appear as transparent in some cases. So we're going to add a mix shader in here, and the factor is going to be camera ray, and that comes in from the light path. So we can minimize that. In fact, I can press Ctrl H and just hide all the other inputs, and then this is going to be transparent. So let's see if that did it. Maybe we need to flip these. Oops. Okay, we still have shadows, so I have to play with it a little bit. This is what I usually do for the shadows to come through in through windows, but maybe it's because we are in that kind of mode. Yeah, because here they're gone. Do we even see them? Yep, we see them like that. Yeah, okay, that's right. So yeah, now we've done it. So in cycles, when we render this, we won't see the actual number in there. So let's hide our booleans. And cool, so we're at a pretty good point now to stop a little bit and take a couple of screenshots from all of our cameras and start to analyze this, understand where we've gotten through, what we have. We're going to start sketching also our floor plates, our structural grid, and have a better understanding. We need to sketch about what this space is starting to look like, our little plaza in here, how it works with people. We need some people in there. So let's duplicate our person and Shift S, selection of cursor, duplicate, Shift S, selection of cursor, duplicate. Somebody's walking on the bridge. Shift S, selection of cursor. Cool. Let's scale these down. I'm going to turn off the context here so it's a little bit easier for us. So S, do something like that. And if I go to top view, let's make sure that we put these here underneath the bridge. And the idea is that we have a waterfall. That's a very, very important part of the project. And I realized before, I thought it's going to come from one of these buildings, the middle building over there. But it's so much better to do that somewhere in a different place. Hi Mocht. Can we use a crowd add-on? Yeah, actually, I'm going to be speaking. I want to do a video for sure for like all the different crowds and like populate them. And I'm gonna that's going to be a separate video, and I'm going to do it with a few different ways, a few different add-ons to understand, you know, which one is most useful for architectural design or how they're useful in different ways. So yeah, thanks for that suggestion. It's actually exactly what I've been thinking recently as well. Cool. And that bridge, we can dress that up a little bit as well. It probably won't be glass, but you know, glass for this kind of geometry is always the first thing that we do for parapets. And then we always change it. Why glass? Because glass can be just a material, whereas slats, you know, or something a little bit more intricate requires quite a bit more understanding of how it should work and how we have to make it, right? So let's go ahead and first off, we can assign the floors material for everything, then assign another material, and we already have the glass bridges, which is fairly transparent, so we're going to assign it here to the top. And that should work fairly well, except why is this not top part of our bridges on top? What do we have here? Glass bridges. Floors. The floors have gone away. The floors have gone away because we did a boolean before we had these solidify modifiers that gave it a bit of thickness, which we now don't because we needed the single faces in order to get the proper areas. So we can keep that as it is, and do it, like just move the geometry nodes around. So if we put the geometry nodes after the boolean and then we solidify, we should have those. But we're also going to have a solidified text in there. Actually, yeah, that's coming okay. Okay, cool. We'll keep it that way then. Because the other way is to do all this within the geometry nodes node, but we'll do that later. Because that seems to be working pretty well. Okay, cool. So let's start taking some screenshots, some images. So we understand how this is working better. So let's enable the cameras and let's enable the context. And let's go through our cameras now. So I'm going to click on my first camera over here, and I think I have two suns turned on. So let's turn one sun off, because otherwise the area starts to look weird. And this floor area, gross floor area, we can turn that off if we don't want it. I think it's useful in some cases, and in others not so useful. So let's go to geometry nodes. And actually, all that we're doing in this geometry nodes is calculating the area. So let's call this areas. So we can turn that off. And we can only turn it off if we want to in the render view. So if we turn on the render view, we still see it here, but we won't see it in the render view. It gets confusing. So I always have to double check all my geometry to make sure that whatever I want is off. For example, booleans, that should be off. Waterfall, we've got waterfalls too. Floors, for some reason that's not on in the viewport render. Of course, you can probably keep your life a little bit simpler by not having some of those toggles, but I like to have them all, like the eye and the monitor. So one is like more temporary height, and then the other one is more permanent viewport disable height. The camera, you should always have the camera, right? Because the camera controls what's being rendered and what's not. And it is a bit more complex to have like two different view states. One is in the viewport and then another one is at render time. But I guess it allows for more flexibility. We just have to double check that. Most times there's never really been a time where I need to view one and not the other, except maybe booleans. That's the one where it totally makes sense, right? We don't want to render the booleans, but sometimes we want to see them in the viewport in order to be able to modify them. Cool. So now we have everything that we need, and I'm using very vanilla cycle settings, right? So cycles, GPU compute, not a lot of samples. This doesn't need to be super fine. The noise is on. Color management is default. Everything else is fairly basic. And then for our environment, for our world, if I go into it, it's just a sky texture. So again, very straightforward, very basic. The idea here is not to have like a wonderful view render. The idea is much more about being able to have views that come out quickly. Okay, so let's press render. While that's happening, I'm just going to close my window. That's view 1. Great. Save it. Alt S. We're going to go to out. What's today's date? Today is the 27th. So I already have a photo in here. These are you see I was working with the thumbnails for today's video. So let's call this AO1. I am not very creative with my image names, my raw image names. What's more important is because they're always in series, right? I never do just one image. I do multiple images. It's more important to have like a folder in the right place. So that's one view. Then we're going to go check out all the other views. So another view here. So F12 for that to render. That should be ready. Alt S, AO2, and you have these plus or minus, so they make it very easy. So you know it's even quicker to save. File format is JPEG. We can set that up, right? So you go in the output in here and output file format JPEG. I think the default is PNG. I like JPEGs because they're much smaller in size, so they don't take up as much space. So we go in here, F12. Gosh, that renders faster than I can take a sip of water. So, oops, I pressed F12 again. So Alt S, and then AO3. Then go make that one active, press F12. Oh, so I like to, this building is a little high. You know, that's probably the height. In fact, I think it's even higher. But I just want to lower it down so we see our plaza a bit better. So let's try that again. That's for sketching purposes, right? We want to go in there and understand how that space works. And the only way to do that, the best way to do that, is by having that kind of connection in there, right? So that's what we want to do in there. Okay, that's done. Is that AO3 or AO4? AO3. Is that way? So that's AO4. And we need to redo the other one as well because we lowered that building, which we won't see. And yeah, we have like a much better view angle of that. And I had a little thought session in the previous video, by the way, whether that thing, so this waterfall, it should land inside of the canal because we're directly adjacent to the canal, or whether it should, you know, land in its own little pool. And the thought process was that it's going to be much better for it to land in its own pool because then the water can be isolated. It's still pretty dirty, right? Probably not as dirty as the canal because you get all kinds of interesting things from the canal. I've seen people pull out bikes. You know, there's cleaners going on those boats all the time that are just pulling strange things out of there. So if we have this land in its own pool, it's a little bit more controlled, and the idea is that then some of the water can be recycled, maybe filtered lightly, and then brought up in there again. So you know we don't have water coming through all the time, new water coming in all the time. Okay, so let's just call this. I'm gonna double click and have this is A3. Now we want to go and start to get some of our street view. So that was a very important view. So this is a hospital, right? And this is a pedestrian street just for the hospital. So it's almost like the wing, the essential wing of the hospital. And the intent has always been to have a very, very strong connection in there. So that view should work really well for us. And we should be able to see the waterfall, which we do. Not the best view from here because of everything. I guess the transparency. So let's fix the transparency of this waterfall in here by going in the object, and I think I have like a default alpha, and what we can do is instead of using like a random alpha in here, it's basically, you know, the water is light and everything else is dark, so we can use a color ramp in here to make this a bit better. Color ramp is just like levels in case you've never used it, so I put that color ramp in there, put that into alpha, and now we can control the darks and the lights. I don't know. Does that look more like water to you? From here, it definitely does. Maybe even like too much. I think it's these black values. There you go. Now yeah, it kind of looks a lot more like water coming down. From that view, it still would look a little bit strange. Not a lot of definition, right? And there's some green in there which we'll need to get rid of, but I think for now it's okay. Okay, you kind of get it, right? I think you kind of get it. Okay, so I'm gonna put this slightly higher, this camera over here, and we can drag the Y, so the viewpoint stays exactly in the same position, but it just shifts the perspective. It's like lens shift lenses, which are typically used for architecture. So if we go to something like 0.1, or let's try something like 0.2. There you go. So now we see a bit more of the building. We can understand or start to understand or try to understand what's going on in there. And now is a good time to put a bit more people in there. You know, that person is probably not going to be exactly here. I would love for this street to become pedestrianized. It's a strange street, and its purpose is really only to service for accident and emergency hospital. So the A&E department, accident and emergency department, is over here. So that's where the ambulances go, and they drop off the patients here in this area, in this off-street drop-off. But to get to there, they have to come on this street. Although now with this square, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work. They might have changed something around, so maybe you only come in there from that position. But what I'm saying is, inevitably, this would not be only a pedestrianized street, because, you know, the hospital needs a lot of deliveries and whatnot. Unless they figure out something super smart from this side, you know, maybe like there's some kind of car park or underground. Now that I'm thinking of it, it would be really nice for it to be over here. Or maybe even like this could become like a drop-off. I don't know what it is, but for now we're keeping this as cars. As much as I would like to make this a completely pedestrianized street. Just sometimes, you know, when you have people dying, you do need that vehicular access. Even though I'm all about bikes, I've been cycling all the time. You know, I remember in my first year, one of the classes that we had in university, I just remember being shocked of never understanding that. You know, they show 100, and I'm sure you've all seen that, where they show 150 people on a bus, and then 150 people on cars, and then 150 people on bikes. And you're like, what's going on here? Why did the world invest so much in this crazy infrastructure for vehicles? Well, we know why. Because the world wasn't 8 billion people when they were thinking about that, right? But now it is. And 8 billion people in cars, not gonna work out, right? So that's why I'm all about alternative means of transportation. And architecture has an important part to do with that, right? So, you know, if we look at the way hospitals were done back in the day, even still in some places in the US, what does a hospital look like? Not like this, unfortunately. It looks like, you know, a typical block with a massive car park in front, because that's the only way to get to it. You don't have any other way to get to it. And so that's what you need to do. Just my 2 cents on car loving. In fact, you know, there's like all these, what is it? Oh yeah, the Dutch. There's a Formula One this weekend. Today, there was a Formula One race in the Netherlands where nobody went there with cars. You were, in fact, banned to go there with cars. And I saw some statistics like 30% of the people went by public transportation, 30% went by train, yeah, public transportation, cycling. I mean, I don't know if you've been to the Netherlands. If you haven't, you should definitely try to go at some point, because they have a completely off-street network for bicycles. And when you see that, you're like, wow. It totally makes sense, you know. The cost of that is so much cheaper than making big roads, because you don't have trucks in there. The weight is much lighter, so they're much cheaper, and they're beautiful because they're off the streets. So you have like this such an amazing environment in there. Yeah. I'm going there, by the way, for the Blender conference, which is in October. I'll be doing a talk. I've been accepted to give a talk. I gave a talk 4 years ago. And I'll probably be presenting this project. And I mentioned that in one of the last design sessions, that it would be a good point to actually have that as maybe like a final position or near final of, you know, where we get to. Okay, so we've got enough people in there. I think it might be useful to put a person or two now on some of our bridges. So in here, Shift S, cursor, selection of cursor, and now we've got a person in there. Good. So we have like some kind of understanding of what that person is doing. I have to close my other window. My kids are outside and they're very loud. All right. Cool. So now we are ready to take a snapshot, except this person needs to go on the ground. So let's go and snap him in there. All of our people need to go on the ground. So Shift S, selection of cursor. I guess there might be a slight slope. It's very flat though. If there's one, it's very subtle, which, you know, I would appreciate if that's coming in from... what is going on here? So, Shift S. There are much smarter ways to put people than manually going in there and putting like a person by person. But I thought I was going to be putting 5 people. I think in the end there are 10 people. So in one of the next sessions, I'm going to show you how we can populate people really easily. Just even the basic people. I also like to give them a color so they stand out a little bit more. Usually something like a sharp red color. So we just understand the scale of the people. Okay, so that's working pretty well. I want to make that view a little bit wider. So right now it's 30 millimeters. Let's try something like 25 millimeters. Good. That bridge is somehow super dark, but I think it has to do with the angle of our sun. So maybe if we shift our sun around, let's go around and rotate the sun a bit. There you go. That's a bit better. Oh, and I know why it's doing that, right? Because we're seeing a little bit of our black nothingness interior. In fact, if we use that glass material again for the rest of the massing, besides the bridges, that might improve the look of it a bit. Let's hide context. Oh. Hide the setup. Go to massing. And the glass is not glassy at all at the moment, is it? We need some alpha in there, so it becomes a bit more transparent. Roughness is 0, that's okay, and I like to make it metallic because it becomes a little bit easier to see. Now we can do that same trick that we did to the text to be able to see it a bit better. So how do we do that? So we go to our object, glass, and we add a mix shader. So mix shader in here, and camera array. So that is something that I use all the time. I don't know why it works. I don't even know. I just remember seeing somebody, I don't know how long now, like 5 years ago, doing it this way with camera path and his camera array. And I just have done it all the time since then to be able to control shadows. What do we want now? So transparency. And I believe we need to change the order of these two. There you go. So what does that do? That now you would get like light coming in, but it still looks more transparent, right? So if we just have this going in there, you see there's less light going through, whereas now we've got more light coming through. I never know the order though. So let's try this order again. Yeah, it's definitely the other way. Okay. The bottom though is too transparent. We should do a different color here for now, at least. Or you know what? We just leave it as this. What I want to do is see the outline where it ends, and to do that, it should be a bit more opaque. But we can also adjust maybe the alpha. There you go. Now we understand that's an edge. Where's the edge here? That's an edge. That's an edge. And that's a very transparent glass. Okay, so this view is ready now to take as well. So F12. I mean, in some respects, you know, this already starts to look like buildings. And, you know, some of the new buildings that go in London, they're not terribly exciting. So this could very much be the sense of, you know, what our building is doing. Of course, we're going to try to be a bit more ambitious than that, especially since we have our lovely bridge that's happening over here. So we definitely want to give it a bit more definition. So Alt S. But I'm just saying that we already have something that's quite well baked and it can be used. Cool. So what else do we want to do? We want to take a couple more cameras from different positions. So I saw that we have a camera that's called Camo 2 Street, which is not Camo 2 Street. It's some kind of top view here. I'm going to erase that, grab this camera here, duplicate it, Shift D, and then rotate. save my file. It hasn't been a while. And last time, by the way, I didn't save my file. I went away after the live session, and then I came back, and there was an issue. Like, my file crashed. So I had to spend quite a bit of time fixing my file after that. Not a lot, because it was still really fresh, but we try to avoid that as much as we can. Okay, so let's see how that view looks. Let's call it cam 02 street. And I want to name these ISOs. Cam ISO 01, cam ISO 02, cam ISO 03, cam ISO 04. Okay, let's look at this. Make it active. So this camera, let's make it active. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, this is starting to look like something, isn't it? Oh, pretty cool. So we want to drag that camera somewhere, maybe even here. Capture the corner. I'm curious about that corner. So something like that. So you're walking along the street and you kind of see that. So let's see it. We should be adjusting our camera as we're looking at it. So there you go. That's a pretty large podium, but we're gonna dress it up nice. We just have to find the language. And we have a couple of more things to do before that, right? So we need to put like a column grid in there, maybe make a floor plan. We want to get to a level of conceptual understanding of the project, like a very basic one that gives us a zoom in from the overall picture. And then from that point on, we want to almost like set up like a mini presentation, right? We want to be able to really understand like what's going on with that kind of space. And once we have that mini presentation ready, then we can continue and move on to refining our project a little bit more. But I think it's very important that at some point we have like a base, right? So we have a very good base drawings, a base floor plan as well, a base understanding of the grid that it's almost presentable in its own, right? And once we have that, then like the basic concept is captured and it's there, then the only thing we can do is improve from that point. Cool. So let me capture this view. So F12 to render it. Hi. What am I doing? Cool. Yeah, good question. So this is a design session. And this is the third episode, and we're modeling a hospital building in London. And it's a very ambitious hospital building with a waterfall that helps people heal better. And in the process at the moment, we've been showing in this episode and in previous episodes how we come up with this kind of massing. And in this exact moment, we're capturing some views of what we've got going on so far. So let's go now to A6. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's save that. And now let's start to capture this from the other side. So this is the hospital side, although there's still quite a few people that are walking through here. But that side is where most of the pedestrians are going to be, which is on the canal side. So let's see this image now. I think that would be quite an exciting thing. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Man, it's already looking like a place that I want to visit right now. Look at that. That's so cool. Our canal is a little high. We need to make a gap and drop that somehow. We'll do that later. But I'm just really excited about this volume already. Wow. Let's add some more people. I don't know if they're waterfall experts. Maybe there's like water fountain experts to understand, the flow of this. Because right now, the way we've got this, it's super nice, right? But I imagine that if we do have like with the intensity of this image, and that's what, let's see, how high is this again? This is, where are we? 37 meters. So this is a 37-meter waterfall. everybody's going to be wet here. That's going to be quite intense. And now, okay, do we drop that bridge lower? You know, does it come maybe to somewhere over here? Or, you know, are we okay with people getting a bit wet? I think we're okay with people getting a bit wet, but not really wet. You know, you shouldn't walk in there, especially your child, and it's winter and it's cold and they get soaked, right? There should be a buffer, quite a large buffer. So I don't know, we might need to make this plaza a little bit smaller. What are we cooking? So this is a building, and a building with a waterfall. So it's a hospital building that we're cooking. Thank you. Cool. So let's drop that somewhere over here. Shift S, cursor to select it. Selection of cursor, and save this view. Probably going to crop it a little bit so we don't see that bottom in there. So Alt S to save that as well, and that's going to be 807. And I think because it's so easy to both explore how this looks in the context while we are modeling, that I'd like to go a little bit overboard and, you know, maybe start to see a few more views from here. And there are a couple of bridges that are missing, by the way. So there's a bridge over here that we need to put in at some point. There's a very cool bridge over here. Let me see if I can show you that bridge, because that is super cool. So Heatherwick, it's by Heatherwick Studio, Bridge Paddington, and it opens and closes. So that's what makes it like super cool. And there it is. Check it out. I guess I can even play this video. So that's the bridge. So that's across like our site over here. So that's Paddington. I mean, this is our area. We're just over there on that site, and here's the bridge. So you go from one side, and you know, it's so cool. Like, I don't know, it shows you like exactly like the potential design of being this sort of revolutionary understanding of what a space can be. And then, you know, you're thinking of, oh my God, does it really need to be so complex to just go around there? But sure, why not? I think like 90% of the time it's open. So, you know, it's not always closed. But anyway, so that little bridge and this context, so our site is just off of the image that we had over there. There it is. Here it is. We're right over here. That's where we are. That's the building that we're putting. So imagine now, you know, you're standing here, you're looking in that direction, and you've got this wonderful bridge. Now I'm looking at these guys here, and there's a lot more windows than I thought. So we need to somehow step back our volume. Like we said here, fine, we can be solid, but here's windows on top. So we have to be very conscious of that. This is a residential building, and we've also got to be like leaving quite a bit of generous room for those people that are over here. So we do need to adjust things a bit. But that's it. So that's what I wanted to show you. Let's go back now to our Blender. Do you really need a really strong machine for Blender? No, you don't. For renderings, it definitely helps. But, you know, if you, even for like basic, like this thing here, it's all wireframe, you know, there's nothing complicated, not a lot of objects. That should render on basically any like low mid-end, not the lowest end computers, but anything below, beyond that, you know, it should be in a pretty good position for you to render. Cool. So let's see what this view looks like. You need a wall in which the water should flow and drain on the pan. Yeah, if we have a wall though, it's going to be a bit problematic because that's going to hide it. Unless that wall is an edge. Maybe, you know, it could be like one of these edges here. So people can see it. It's very important. Like this view here is super important, right? So we want to be able to understand that there's a waterfall on there. So if we have that view and we put a wall over here, then we don't really see that. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that wall, could it be glass? Could be a glass wall, can't it? Glass though could look quite dirty. That's the only thing as well. Okay, so let's go back in here. Put our camera. Where's our camera? Make it active. we made this one active. We need to select this one over here. Nope, the other one. This one. There you are. That's the one I wanted. Rotate. That's what we're seeing here. It would be good to capture the top of the building. So for that, we need to change our aspect ratio a little bit. And it works a bit strange in Blender, but basically, if we make this these are the absolute ends, right? So if we change the aspect ratio, it's going to increase the top and the bottom, but it's going to keep the sides in the same position. So if we make this square, so let's go to 1920. You see it captures everything, but those edges stay exactly in the same position. And now we can go to our camera and shift the Y a little bit higher, so we have a better view of it. There you go. So that's what we got going on in there. So F12 to render that. Yeah, that bridge is really nice, isn't it? So Alt S to save this image here as well. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for the images. Now, we always have to do little adjustments, and that's the design, right? It's never a super finished thing. But what did I notice here? So we need a bit more gap for all these guys, so they're not in their dingy, dark corner that unfortunately we've made at the moment, right? So all these are resi, right? So if you're a resident here, the last thing you probably want to see is sick people, you know, or pregnant people, or whatever people that close to you. So we need to step that corner back. Also, here there's a couple of step backs with windows that are facing that way. That's going to be tricky because, you know, we're going to lose a lot of floor real estate. So maybe we won't resolve that part too much, but at least this corner we can resolve. So let's go to our trusty old booleans that we've got in here and turn them on. So let's turn on the booleans. And we need to now go into, let's say, here. Let's go in here. And this Boolean plaza, we'll just duplicate that and put it somewhere over here. And because it's so automatic and works with the collection, we've already got this, except the facade, right? So the facade we need to do a bit separately. So what do we want to do? Maybe align those edges to something like that. That should work a bit better. Now let's click on the contour curves and refresh to update out. And bim bam boom, we're done. Amazing, so fast. We lost some of our setbacks because they were aligned to that object over there, so we need to go back and set them back. Or well, yeah, I think it'll be much more useful to do that. Or we can create, how should we do it? Yeah, let's just create it from here. I'm going to hide a couple of things because it gets a little bit confusing. Even I get confused, let alone, you know, if you're not doing that, it probably gets even more confusing. So let's go in there, add a loop cut, snap it to somewhere along here. And now we're going to grab these two faces. Yep. And let's push them. Well, first we want to extrude them. Now we're extruding in a very strange direction. It's because we have that bottom. We don't need that bottom, I suppose. Let's undo that because... Did we extrude? No, we didn't. Okay, so now extrude just this face. That's all we need to extrude. Okay. So that's getting there. Now we're getting some funky little places over here, right? So that space there, you know, like the columns, we have to figure out the column grid. Once we figure out like the column structure, we might need to adjust some of our setbacks just to make sure that they work correctly. Okay. And what I'm going to do is add another loop cut in here. Snap that to somewhere over here. Whoops. Snapping the wrong thing. Is that in the right place? Nope. Let's go to somewhere over here. Okay. And now that just that top face, let's push that in a little bit more. There you go. That's what I wanted to do. And we can push probably these sides here as well. So we also have a setback that way. And now let's update our contours. There. That's much better. And most importantly, these guys, you know, they have a bit of breathing room, don't they? Now that bottom, let's turn off the context here for a second. Just turn off the whole setup. And so you see how we have a setback around this area over here? I think that might be a good thing to do around, except I'm noticing that level of setback and this level of setback is not quite the same. And it's okay because it's just a very simple element. It's just in here we have to grab these faces and move them one floor up. So G is at minus 4.2 and that should give us the right setback, right? Yep. And now we want to create just another setback over here. Lots of setbacks. We're really sculpting this in a fairly unique way, I would say. Now I'm just grabbing a boolean and rotating it over here, but check it out. We're gonna have a cool hole to our building right now. How cool is that? So cool. All right, let's get back a little bit more closer to reality by making this the right size for that corner. So it's really all about that corner now. So let's go in here and drag that. Now aligning that might be a bit tricky. Which way is this? This is Y, no X. And let's see if we can snap. Okay, we snapped it. Cool, that's it. And this can be subtle. I'm making these like small setbacks just so they break down the volumes a little bit. We might have done it too much. I think this is like a lot of, you know, it's interesting. It's very nice setbacks, but it might be too much, right? So we might need to tone it down a notch. And how would we be able to tell? So most importantly is understanding how the structural grid works, more or less, right? So, you know, like, is that spacing too much? Is it too little? Is that gap like too much in there for like a cantilever? Or, you know, are we going to have like two sets of columns which are basically along that side, which is going to be quite dense though, isn't it? I mean, this is what here? This is like 2 meters. So, you know, it doesn't look good to have, and it's expensive as well to have 2 meters. At the same time, a 2-meter cantilever, just to have all the columns along that edge, is fairly expensive, right? 1 meter is fine, but 2 meters gets a bit, you know, like anything over 1 meter, it just gets a little bit trickier. Anyways, we got it. We do have what we have now. Let's see, we might need to step this corner back here a little bit. Just, I'm thinking, you know, again, for light for these guys, if you're in a balcony that you're looking at somewhere over here and, you know, you're hanging out, all you see is this tall building. But imagining if like we shave off these 3 floors in here, then that's going to work much better for you. And that's a pretty quick thing. There you go. Let's refresh that. So that should work better. So yeah, all of a sudden it's a bit more tolerable, beautiful, let's say, for the neighbors. Cool. Let's take a couple more screenshots now. And so the process begins. Well, it has begun, hasn't it? But that's the process. Oh, wait, this doesn't work here that way. Let's go back and check it. Maybe that thing doesn't work there. So now we're going to start our B series. You can create a script. I do have a script. I don't have right now. I'll just render these really quickly. I'm just clicking on the cameras. I know they all work fine because we've checked through them. I'm clicking on the active button in here and then pressing F12. That should render. That's all that it rendered in that view. And now we're doing with, let's check back our format. So let's make this 1080. Because what happened? We're rendering like in a slightly different format than what we had before. Okay, so we're setting this. I mean, it makes sense that we're setting that back in there. I am questioning, like, on this side it looks nice and clean and understandable, right? We have like very typical setbacks, except that middle. It used to be the middle, but now it's not quite the middle anymore. So we might need to go and adjust that a little bit, so to have like the facade expression to be more like ABA kind of rhythm. So Alt S, and now let's start our B series, B01. Let's go with the next one. Jesur says render quality is not good. Explain why my render quality. Well, I don't know what you're trying to render. Are you rendering like these kinds of views, like hidden line views, or are you trying to do like photorealism? Because clearly, one is quite different than the other. So, but for these kinds of views, they're very basic. You just have hidden line, and we have just a bit of materiality in there. And as long as it stands out and you understand that what we're doing is different in the context, then that's it, basically. Okay, let's keep on moving quickly. How long are we? Oh, wow, we need to finish. It's an hour and a half already. So maybe then in the next session, we're going to start to explain how we start to put our work in a presentable manner, and we look at some floor plans. So forget if I render this one. Alt S. Nope. V03. This is a cool view. It's a very cool view. Let's go to Gamma ISO 04. Yeah, the setbacks here, we have to think about. I think they might be okay. They're not terribly crazy. V04. Now let's go to our street cameras. And yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of what we've got here. So Alt S, V05, F12. We can change the crop now. Not 192, 1920. 1920. F12. And I think I can do a bit more of a camera shift. 0.25. Let's try that again. Yeah, we're still missing a bit of the corner, so let's try. And do I have the right camera selected? Sometimes I'm editing things on the wrong camera, so it's always good to check in the outliner what's selected. That's selected. Is it? I feel like I'm shifting the wrong thing now. Why don't I just go and do this? Okay, it is pretty white though, isn't it? So maybe something like that. Let's try now to render it. Modern hospital facades are a tricky thing because they're very nondescript, right? And they tend to be fairly generic. Now for us, for this facade, I think it would be really good to reference some of the industrial legacy of the rest of the hospital. So a lot of these buildings, they're like Victorian. I mean, they're from Victorian era, so quite old, from the 1800s. So brick, big windows. I don't know if there's any arches. I love arches, so maybe we can look at some arches, but I don't really recall seeing much. We can shift this camera a little bit too in the Y direction. So we see a little bit more. 0.4. 0.5. Too much. 0.43. There you go. And our slabs are coming all the way out. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not. I think one thing we can definitely start to think about is puncturing like some holes in there, like setting the facade. But yeah, I mean, what do you guys think about this now? How do you see it? Now the bottom is too mirrory. I really want to give it a different material. Maybe that's the last thing we're going to do, because Yeah, we're gonna leave it at here, but let's give it a facade. First off, yeah, we need a facade. So we're gonna have to redo this series of photos of renders, but that's okay. That's the process. This is the real process, uncut, and that's how it goes. So contour curves. I have a lot of people. I'm gonna put them in a new collection in setup. Let's grab them all, put them in there, just so we can minimize that. People. Okay. Always a good idea to save the file. Need a sip of water. And now, let's go in there. Let's hide the context. Hide the booleans. And we're going to duplicate these contour curves. So there's a couple of ways to do it. We already have the curve when you think about, well, do we? Because it's not, no, we need to do this again. So we can duplicate this, Shift D to contour curves, and we can say that is facade. And that's facade bottom. Okay, so this facade bottom, we need to adjust the tissue contour settings. By the way, there's a way to do this with geometry nodes. So we don't even need to press refresh on there. Maybe I can show that next time if there's desire, or that could be a really good thing to show on Patreon. So in case you're not aware of these files, they're available on Patreon after all the sessions, and it's a good way to support the channel. And if you're liking what you're seeing, you can grab that and yeah, support us. So now let's change this offset value to 0, and we want to have one curve. We don't want to have more curves. There you go. Really simple and straightforward. And now all we need to do is adjust our spacing and our height. But first, so this geometry nodes, that should be called facade, just so we don't confuse it. And now it's being used by 2 data blocks. So we want to click on that too. So it's facade 001. And we can say this is facade bottom. So let's go to this view over here. Yeah, geometry nodes. So Carl Mattel 2010 says, yeah, I would like to learn about geometry nodes. Well, this is the place for you because it's hands-on, it's project-based in a way, right? So we're doing all these tiny little geometry nodes bits on there. And there's going to be a lot more. I'm trying to keep them pretty simple so you can see what it is. This is basically making our facade, so it's not terribly complex to sort out. And earlier in the video, I explained the whole process. So this needs to be 8 meters, and now we need to change the length. So that's the gap, that's the space in between them. So we can make it something like 1.2. We don't want to make it too large, although I have to say over here, let me turn on the context. Oh, I want to show you that on Google Earth because it's really cool. But just next door, which building is it? I think it's this building over here. So it has a massive, it's very similar thing, right? So it's got like this 8-meter lobby, and then it's not this tall, right? I just made it shorter for our views, but that building is pretty tall. And in there, like, it's got the tallest pieces of glass that I've seen besides Apple stores. It's pretty cool. Let's go in here and say Paddington. Fly. Whoa, what's going on with my Google Earth? But yeah, that's actually the building. Supposed to go and do that, but okay, it might take a minute to load. So let's get rid of this. And now we're gonna go, and which building is it? Yeah, it's this building over here. It's got really tall pieces of glass. Whoops. Let's see if there's a street view on here. There is of some locker room, it looks like. It's not what we want. See if there is another street view. I'm sure I have glass buildings of it, but it's just impressive. I think we underestimate like the technology to make glasses, and it has improved so much, but glass is like one of those materials that we just take for granted, unless it's an Apple store, right? Apple stores are like some of those things that, come on, snapping at a strange place. Let's try something like over here. That's better. There you go. So yeah, I think that's about 8 meters. So, you know, that's the kind of glass. And again, that's our site. So this is our site over here. And that's our residential building. And these are the guys that we want to, you know, make sure that they have pretty decent views, especially the ones that are like way set back in there. So that's why we did this bit with our building over here that we've got going on. Cool. Okay. So back in our model. So maybe we can do like 1.5 meters over here. So, and the idea is, you know, that might just start to look a bit more realistic. And we can, what else can we do here? So height 0.5 meters. I don't know if you want to make this more transparent or less transparent. And for that, we should have like one of the views and have like a nice understanding of it. 0.2 or 0.3. Okay. So something like that. Yeah, it's not ideal, right? But we already have like so much more definition about like how this process is working. So now let's go back to our cameras and start the process again. Where we go. So we need to adjust this here to 1080. And now F12 to start getting this in the right place over here. Cool, so we got our first view here, so Alt-S to save that, and we're gonna start from the beginning, right? So this is B01. Then next camera, F12. Hey guys, some people saying hi. Hi Markham 3D. And it's a cool building by Michael Musician. Cool. Alright, so let's save this view here. BO2. F12. Alt-S. BO3. Then Alt-S. Oops, first I need to press 12. F12. Alt-S BO4. Cameras, street view cameras. So let's adjust, and that's, I guess there are some add-ons to do that, by the way, to like have like better camera presets with different cameras. I try to stay away from them. Like some of them are paid, and because I'm trying to show this to like you guys and to a lot more people, that's why I think it's much better to try to keep away from you know, extra add-ons to do those kinds of things, especially if they're paid. But you know, there are some that have like special presets for each camera that also save the resolution, because here, you know, we have to go back and kind of manually do it every single time. So what do I want to do now? Just shift this camera a little bit to, let's try 0.35, maybe even more, 0.4. There you go. So F12. Render that. All right, so Alt-S, and that's B05. So that's good. F12. Alt-S, B06. I really like the Blender doesn't have like a, are you sure you want to overwrite your file kind of thing? But it does at least make it red. So red is, you know, when you're overwriting things. Wait, Where do we get up to? Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, this will be 7. That's right. And then this camera over here. So F12. So yeah, so that's it for this session, really. In the next session, we're going to look into how we create some floor plans. We'll add a grid, and we'll start putting some dimensions on the building. So we're gonna keep, the facade pretty basic for like 2 sessions. Start to address maybe like the ground floor a little bit more, like where we put cores, so the other important building bits, building parts, and then we're gonna go back and make this like super nice, right? We're gonna look at maybe like a couple of options. I don't know if we're gonna go like super smooth Zaha style, maybe not. We'll see conceptually what starts to make sense, what works, what doesn't, and so yeah, stay tuned. This file, again, is going to be available on Patreon. And if you'd like to support the work, then definitely check it out. And yeah, thank you for being with us. And your support is much appreciated. So see you guys next time. Next time is going to be either Wednesday or Thursday. So I'm going to try to make this fairly regular. And it's going to be a little bit later on Wednesdays or Thursdays. Cool.